Please welcome to the stage NCLEJ board member Douglas Curtis.
Good evening. Welcome to the 2023 Justice Maker Awards, celebrating all of the work at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. We are absolutely thrilled to have all of you here this evening. As God said, I am Doug Curtis. I am a lawyer at Arnold & Porter, and I am also a member of NCLEJ's Board of Directors. And on behalf of the entire board and the staff of the NCLEJ, it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. We're here to honor the work of the National Center for Law and Economic Justice and all the individuals and organizations that are fighting to advance the causes of racial, economic, and disability justice. You don't need to look far, even in this room of relative privilege, to find individuals whose lives have been directly impacted by the work of the center over its many years of existence. For those of you who are familiar with the work of the NCLEJ, you know its storied history of advocacy in the courts, in the legislatures, and in the streets of the United States. And for those of you who are new to the work of the NCLEJ, welcome. Number one, we're absolutely delighted to have you here. And you will be hearing more this evening about the work of the center. But as someone whose family depended on public income assistance and housing assistance and food stamps when I was growing up, and saw that public support could be essential not only to my family, but every family's ability to survive and to thrive, I'm particularly grateful to all of you who have joined us here to support the NCLEJ and to celebrate this year's honorees. We thank you for being champions of justice, everyone in this room. Thank you very much. So your generosity tonight ensures that NCLEJ can continue its vital work to ensure that all families have their basic needs met, like food, shelter, and water, to fight back against racial and gender discrimination in the workplace, to advance the rights and dignity of people with disabilities, and to end racially biased policing and enforcement practices that harm communities of color. We have a terrific program this evening, but before we do anything else, I do want to offer a huge thank you to our generous sponsors and donors who've made this evening and this celebration possible. I think you've seen the lists of our sponsors have been cycling through on the screens, but I do want to take a brief moment right here at the top of the evening to thank our underwriter sponsor this evening, Kirkland & Ellis. Thank you very much. And our three title sponsors, Ballard Spahr, thank you so much. Deckert, and Morgan Lewis, thank you all very much. I also want to thank our two ASL interpreters who will be joining us this evening, Sam and Cedar. Thank you very much for being here, actually. So to kick things off, please welcome to the stage my friend, my fellow NCLEJ board member, and not for nothing, the president of the American Civil Liberties Union, Deborah Archer.
Thank you. Yes, not for nothing. It's a lot of hours for not for nothing, but it's okay. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming out this evening to support and celebrate NCLEJ's critical work. I know that I don't need to explain to the people in this room that we are living through an inflection point in American history. Our fundamental principles and beliefs and the mechanisms that we rely on to build our democracy and protect the rule of law are all threatened. America has always been an ethos, just a set of promises and demands. And the work we do has been about bridging the gap between those promises and demands. And now those promises are being threatened, and fundamental principles are being questioned. The work has never been easy, but some days, some years, it can feel like we are losing more than we are winning. And the losses really do become harder to bear. The problems we face in the world today are entrenched and complex, but there is no problem in this world, no crisis, no injustice that we cannot solve together. NCLEJ is at the very center of this work. Its mission is to address the crises that continue to fester in our national core, the racism and economic oppression that separate us from our ideals and stand as roadblocks to opportunity. Despite all the challenges we face as a country, I know that we need not despair because we can trust in the power and efficacy of organizations like NCLEJ to make the impossible possible. NCLEJ understands that the complex obstacles that stand in the way of justice require complex solutions. Litigation in the courts, storytelling in the press, organizing in the streets, education in our schools, advocacy in the halls of justice, and power building in our communities. This is a small but mighty team that punches way above its weight, an organization whose impact and strength belie its size. For nearly 60 years, NCLEJ has worked across domains and in deep partnership with communities to achieve its aim of racial and economic justice and civil rights. I believe in NCLEJ because I've seen the impact of its work. And I also believe in NCLEJ because I know the value of its leadership. I've known Dennis Parker for about 25 years. I first knew him as my supervisor when I was just a baby attorney, as he likes to call me, at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and he led the education practice there. Our paths continued to cross, next at the ACLU, where he led the racial justice program while I served on the board, and now at NCLEJ, where I am honored to serve on the board. Dennis has been a cherished mentor, a valued teacher, and a beloved friend. Dennis believed in me long before I believed in myself, and I would not be the advocate that I am today without Dennis's guidance and support. This work of forcing America to live up to its values and promises needs leaders with big brains and big hearts. And in Dennis Parker, the NCLEJ has this in spades. As we tackle the crises in our world, remember it will not be easy. It is never, ever easy. Frederick Douglass said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters." NCLEJ knows that today the fight for freedom takes thunder and lightning, and the fight for equality requires the ocean's awful roar. So thank you for serving. Whether you serve by working at NCLEJ, on the board, or one of our partner organizations, and thank you for your support, whether by supporting Dennis and the amazing team of talented and committed professionals and advocates at the center, with your time, knowledge, or money, thank you. Know that your service and support is vital, and it really does help make NCLEJ's fight for justice possible. Thank you.
One of the great benefits of doing social justice work is you get to work with extraordinary people, extraordinarily talented people with so much promise, and Deborah is certainly the epitome of that, but also all of the people who I have the pleasure of working with now. So thank you again, Deborah, and thank you for your inspiring remarks. As you heard, I'm Dennis Parker, the Executive Director of the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. Tonight, we celebrate our social justice and corporate honorees who have advanced the causes of racial and economic justice. We also recognize NCLEJ's incredible staff and you, our critical supporters, who power their work. Will all NCLEJ staff members stand, please? If you're fortunate enough to be at a table with one of the staff, ask them about the work that they do and why they do it and why they love it and why they do it so well. I'd also like to start by thanking our sponsors and donors whose generous donations make it possible for NCLEJ to continue our critical work. I would also like to recognize NCLEJ's Board of Directors for their stalwart commitment to supporting our mission for over 50 years. Would each of the NCLEJ board members please stand? And I'd like to thank our special honorees, Heather McGhee and Brennan Torregrossa. You'll hear about them in greater detail later this evening, but each of them has fought tirelessly for the values that NCLEJ holds dear. For more than 50 years, NCLEJ has been at the forefront of the fight to advance racial and economic justice. Our organization was founded in 1965 by Edward V. Sparrow, who many of you know to be the father of welfare law. We were founded on the belief that people have a fundamental right to health care, housing, food, and basic income. But our work isn't just about the basics. We believe it's not enough for people just to survive. We want them to thrive. And this truth informs so much of the work that we do. As Deborah said, this has been a challenging period in our nation's history, and particularly for low-income families and people of color. The last several years have been exceptionally difficult. Low-income families are struggling to get by because of skyrocketing costs and rising inflation. Police continue to kill unarmed Black people with impunity. And extremist voices in government have overturned the national right to an abortion and are stepping up their attacks on women. And even though the CDC and WHO have declared an end to the global COVID health emergency, our country has not learned from the lessons of the brutal economic and racial inequalities exposed over the past few years. Black and brown people disproportionately died at higher rates of COVID. And they were also more vulnerable to layoffs caused by lockdown measures. Despite our nation's reliance on the essential work of low-wage workers, they are refused adequate compensation, access to safe working environments, fair wages, and adequate health care. It's easy to surrender to pessimism in the face of injustice. But I'm proud to say that NCLEJ has fiercely resisted this urge. We instead are rising to this challenge. When we see injustice, we go on the offensive. Building upon our storied past, we continue to fight for the rights of people in need, to a strong social safety net of public benefits, to robust protections and benefits for low-wage workers, and to greater economic inclusion for people with disabilities. We're not alone in our efforts. We have learned from the past that it is not enough to work at a distance from the communities that we represent. Rather, we recognize that these communities play a central role in identifying the problems they face and the solutions that they need. That is why we are so proud to collaborate with community partners, activist groups, and other allies to combat discrimination across the country through our high-impact litigation and advocacy efforts. And I'm proud to tell you that NCLEJ continues to make a difference in the lives of countless low-income individuals and families across the country. The last several months have seen us take major action to expand the rights, benefits, and protections of those most in need. Here are some of them. In Alaska, we partnered with the Northern Justice Project to sue the state over their failure to provide SNAP benefits to tens of thousands of eligible families. Indigenous communities and other racial minorities in Alaska are particularly at risk of food insecurity, and we fought to ensure that the state meets its legal obligations. Recently, we secured a hard-fought settlement with the state of Alaska. Thanks to our efforts, the state has pledged to have their over 10,000 person food stamp backlog within the next 6 months. In New York City, we joined One Fair Wage to fight back against racially biased pay disparities against black and brown Applebee's workers. Our client, Justin Onwenu, is a bright young man who decided to speak out on the injustice of black and brown Applebee's servers in the South Bronx being paid less than white servers in Midtown in identical positions. To make matters worse, he was fired from his position after we filed our complaint. We are determined to hold Applebee's franchisee accountable for both racial employment discrimination and their retaliatory firing of Justin. In Florida, we are excited to join the coalition of Immokalee workers for a groundbreaking new partnership to advance workers' protections and human rights across the country. CIW workers pioneered the award-winning worker-driven social responsibility model, and we're excited to help even more worker organizations adopt this paradigm to hold corporations responsible and ensure that workers can thrive with good wages, conditions, and protections. These are just a few examples of NCLEJ's high-impact work. These cases are emblematic of issues faced by low-income people of color everywhere across the country and underscore the stakes of our work. We cannot do this work without you. Every dollar you give powers our efforts to advance racial, economic, and disability justice across the country. And without your support, we simply could not fight these cases. So thank you again for being here tonight. I'm so proud to be a part of NCLEJ, and it's my pleasure to share with you this short video about our work.
The National Center for Law and Economic Justice was founded on the belief that everyone has a fundamental right to healthcare, housing, food, and basic income. Our lawyers, advocates, and activists litigate to fight for economic and racial justice, improving the lives of millions of people around the country. We're combating workplace discrimination and wage theft, expanding access to critical public benefits, giving historically marginalized communities a voice in the courts, and securing landmark Supreme Court decisions with real impact. United together, we can and will continue to build a more inclusive democracy, economy, and society for all who call our country home, giving everyone an equal opportunity to thrive.
The National Center for Law and Economic Justice is a litigation and advocacy organization that fights for the economic rights of vulnerable populations, of disenfranchised people.
NCLEJ was created in 1965 by an inspirational lawyer, Edward Sparrow, and he had a vision of equality, of prosperity, that he hoped could be achieved through litigation and other advocacy.
We have three main strategies. We use groundbreaking class action litigation, policy advocacy, and support for grassroots organizing in order to achieve our goals.
Part of the excitement is working with community groups and having them tell us, this is what's important to us. This is what will change our lives.
Through my organization at LSA Family Health Service, we were working with hundreds of New York City Housing Authority tenants around housing conditions that were affecting people's health. And we teamed with the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. We were able to compel the Housing Authority to improve their mold and moisture policies and procedures.
I tend to think of legal work as problem solving fundamentally. Different perspectives and different kinds of experience bring us different kinds of problem solving, and that's a great set of tools to have.
The center has been involved in at least half a dozen cases before the Supreme Court, I was lucky enough to be one of the original attorneys involved in putting together the case that became Goldberg versus Kelly, our major Supreme Court victory, which is good law until today, about the due process right to notice in a hearing before having benefits terminated.
NCLEJ has returned millions of dollars in benefits to low-income communities. I'm really proud of our work in Buffalo, New York to secure police accountability. The city of Buffalo was targeting low-income Black communities for punitive and aggressive traffic enforcement, extorting millions in traffic fines and fees. We have been working with an incredible group of advocates to challenge these practices.
I'm very proud of the impact that NCLEJ has had on low-income communities in so many ways. We have a relatively small staff that does a huge amount of work. If we've done all of this with so little, what could we do if we had more resources? I'm excited about the future of NCLEJ and the role it can play in changing a society that is too often unfair to too many people.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Saima Akhtar. I'm a senior attorney at NCLEJ. It's really a pleasure to see you all here tonight. I work on public benefits, and I led NCLEJ's efforts to sue the state of Alaska over the failure of the SNAP program to provide benefits to vulnerable communities there. Just as a reminder, thank you. Just as a reminder for everybody who may not speak benefits fluently, SNAP is the new name since 2008 of the Federal Food Stamp Program. SNAP benefits are a critical support to low-income people. When SNAP benefits are delayed or denied, families and disabled people will go hungry in our communities. I like to point out that nobody eats retroactively. Even if you get your benefits back, you don't get to go back and have those meals again. Every single person needs to eat every single day. This is why NCLEJ makes securing and expanding access to food and SNAP benefits a priority in our work. While we are seeing problems in SNAP programs across the country right now, the problems in Alaska were and continue to be extreme. Across the country, we know that food insecurity spiked dramatically during the pandemic. In the state of Alaska, 13% of the state population was receiving SNAP benefits. A large portion of these SNAP recipients are members of Indigenous and Alaskan Native communities or other racial minorities. In 2022, the Alaska Department of Health, which is responsible for administering SNAP in the state, failed in its operation of the SNAP program. More than 60% of all of the cases went unprocessed. There was a massive backlog of unprocessed SNAP cases going back nearly 8 months, and the head of the Division of Public Assistance stepped down. On top of these processing failures, Alaskans in need of food benefits face huge barriers even when they seek to apply for benefits in the first place. Alaska has only 11 offices for the entire state where people can apply in person. The hours at the offices were limited, or the offices were simply closed. And frankly, these offices are simply unreachable for many Alaskans who live in rural areas who would need to access these offices by plane and be able to afford a plane ticket. Alaskans are, in theory, able to use a call center to apply for benefits, but in practice what we found is that the wait times on the call center were excessive, sometimes 5 hours or more to apply for food benefits, and calls were often dropped. Most callers were never able to connect with an actual worker, and the Department of Health also failed to provide appropriate language interpretation and translation for services for Alaskans who needed these. I think the level of desperation in Alaska is something that is hard to fathom here in this room tonight. The food banks and the food pantries actually ran out of food. People were hospitalized in Alaska for malnutrition this year. Our client, Zoya Jenkins, who is a member of the Yupik Indigenous community, resorted to eating only once a day to make sure that she had enough food to feed her children. She didn't have money to buy a freezer either. which means that she had to buy small amounts of food at a higher cost. In Alaska, NCLEJ needed to make sure that remote and often indigenous communities who have been ignored and left behind for too long had a legal remedy when their government was failing to do its job. We fought hard to ratchet up the pressure on the state of Alaska, and I'm proud to tell you that earlier this month we reached a preliminary agreement. In return for temporarily staying the litigation for 6 months, the state has agreed to extend certification periods, hire additional workers, temporarily waive processing interviews, and simplify the documentation in order to try and have its more than 10,000 case backlog. The state has also agreed to certification of 2 of our 3 proposed classes, and the court has now approved that. It's really good. It's really good. We believe that this 6-month stay is actually the most efficient path to getting critical food benefits out to vulnerable Alaskan families, and I'm really proud of the work that went into reaching this interim agreement. The state would not have taken these steps to address their processing failure if we had not filed a lawsuit to hold them accountable. Cases like these are why I decided to practice law. Before I went to law school, I ran an emergency domestic violence shelter for nearly 5 years. All of my clients were clearly unhoused. The majority of them were women of color. Almost half of them had disabilities or other health conditions impacting their ability to support themselves and their families. What that work was about, in the most basic sense, was finding housing and food security for people who needed it. Really the most basic elements of life necessary to build a life. And there simply were not enough resources to go around. I got my law degree to try and address the problems that were created and led to these most basic resource shortages. Every single person needs to eat every single day, needs to drink water, needs a place to shelter, and needs access to health care. It is both striking and jarring to me that our country does not acknowledge this and does not provide for it. When we secure wages and preserve access to income, advocate for water justice and food access, and we fight to preserve and expand core safety net benefits like welfare and SSI, it enables people to live with dignity. That is the critical meaning of our work. Dignity is at the heart of what we do at NCLEJ. We believe it is not enough for people to just survive. We believe that they should thrive. I will close my remarks with a message to the lawyers and organizations who have joined us this evening to celebrate our work and the work of our justice makers. All of you are actively working to make our justice system better, to change this for the better, and I am honored to be with you in that fight. I'd also like to address the generous donors who are in the room with us this evening. We cannot do our critical work without you. Your support powers our efforts to advance racial, economic, and disability justice. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight and for supporting our mission. The tension we see in society as a whole right now is actively playing out in our nation's legal structures. The work we do is difficult and also absolutely critical to making the system more just and more accessible. Thank you so much.
Hi again. I was prepared to say thank you for your remarks, Simon. I didn't realize how verklempt I'd be about the whole thing. The mission of the NCLEJ and the actual work of the staff of the NCLEJ is inspirational. And dinner's about to come, but I'm going to take a few minutes to put myself before you here to ask for your individual support. Before doing that, with Simon's remarks, I want to once again just say, let's give a round of applause to the staff of the NCLEJ. So, I'll try to make this brief, but all the work you've heard about tonight takes great resources. And as anyone with legal experience knows, cases can take many years to bring to any sort of full resolution. The work of the NCLEJ requires really serious commitment and funding over the long term, which is why I'm here now asking you to support NCLEJ's mission. Everyone who's here is part of support. This has been a fantastic evening for raising a lot of money for NCLEJ, and we do appreciate the sponsors who've come forward to make such an impact. But our small and mighty team still has a lot of work that they want to do. We're always asked to do more, and we are in the unfortunate position of needing to turn people away because we don't have the resources for more work. We need your help to build our capacity, and we need your help to reach more communities. We need your help to set even bigger goals and secure even bigger victories for working people. So, again, dinner's on its way. But before I tell you how to give, I'm very excited to announce that just a few days ago, we received an incredible commitment from our board chair, Sandy Hauser, from Denton's. She has issued a challenge to each of us this evening in the room. If you make a gift, she will match it. Every gift up to $25,000, which means that you can double the impact of any donation you can make. So now I want you to consider giving and to have your gift become twice as impactful to the NCLEJ. So here's how to give. And I think you can take a look at the screen and it'll give you instructions for how to do it. It's super simple. Just take out your phones and text NCLEJ to 50155. It's as easy as that. If you'd like to get your name up on the screen, that's even better. To do that, you still send a text to 50155, and your text should say NCLEJ, the amount of your gift, your name, and a message if you'd like to give NCLEJ or anyone else a shout out. Once you send your text, you'll be sent a link to donate directly online, and all gifts are fully tax deductible. And if you need any assistance or prefer to fill out a pledge card, please flag one of the volunteers who are in the room. They'll be happy to help you. Flag me down. I will be happy to help you. Your donations tonight could help us hire more full-time staff attorneys and also make critical investments in other areas that will support the mission of the NCLEJ over the long term. And because we're among friends and close allies tonight, I'm also going to let you in on a little fundraising secret at the NCLEJ. NCLEJ is very fortunate to receive generous support from law firms and from foundations, but we don't receive any government funding, and we greatly depend on the generosity of individuals to keep us going. Traditionally, the funding sources for impact litigation can be very limited. The pool of potential donors in this relatively niche area is pretty small, and it's made up disproportionately of lawyers, many of you in the room tonight, for example, who understand not only the ethical duty to support justice initiatives like the NCLEJ does, but also know how litigation work can lead to meaningful changes in the lives of real people, low-income people. And I know that there are folks here who are new to NCLEJ. Many of you are here as guests of law firms or friends who've purchased tables, and again, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you here. I ask you to personally consider joining us in support of the NCLEJ. The importance of the work cannot be overstated. As we've seen in the last several years, the courts and legal system have become increasingly weaponized against low-income families and communities of color, and we need more lawyers and more resources to fight in the courts to ensure economic justice for our most vulnerable communities. We have roughly 200 people in the audience tonight. If everyone chipped in even a modest amount, we could go a long way towards shoring up our ability to scale up at NCLEJ. And remember, every gift made tonight, up to $25,000, will be matched, thanks to Sandy's incredible challenge. That means we could end tonight with $50,000 more to support the NCLEJ's important work, and that would make a huge difference. So please, make a tax-deductible donation right now and join us in the fight for fairness and justice. Take a moment by texting NCLEJ to 50155 or asking a volunteer for a pledge card. No amount is too small. Perhaps more to the point, no amount is too big. Thank you all very much and enjoy your dinner. We'll be back in a bit. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi there, good evening again, and welcome back. Plates are being taken away, dessert and coffee are being served, but we're going to jump back into the second part of our program. So with no further ado, please welcome to the stage my fellow NCLEJ board member, Julie Cohen.
Oh, it's bright up here. Good evening. My name is Julie Cohen. I'm a partner at Skadden Arps and an NCLEJ board member. The NCLEJ and Skadden families have lost a treasured member. To all those who knew her, Nancy Lieberman had the rare fighting spirit of a person who was determined to leave her mark upon the world. She leaves behind an enormous legacy, and her story will continue to inspire countless individuals in the years to come. Just a little bit about Nancy's background for those who did not know her. From a young age, Nancy's vision for her future was crystal clear, if all of us were so lucky. She decided to become a lawyer at just 12 years old. She saw her goals to fruition through sheer force of will, grit, and determination. She earned her law degree early and joined our firm at just 24 years old. The firm quickly realized that Nancy was someone special and rose to the top of her game as an M&A lawyer, working on some of the largest deals in the world. In the 1980s, she was often the only woman at the table. She never let that discourage her. In 1987, she became our firm's youngest ever partner at the age of 30, paving the way for generations of other women lawyers to make their impact in the field of law. And to that, I am truly grateful to her. Nancy's determination would carry her through incredible career triumphs. It would also carry her through a life-changing injury. After a devastating ski accident left her paralyzed from the neck down with limited lung capacity, Nancy's life was changed forever. She was told that about 80% of patients with spinal cord injuries never return to work, but Nancy simply refused to accept that. She decided to fight, and through difficult rehabilitation, therapy at the cutting edge of scientific research, she regained the use of her arms. Nancy came back to Skadden in 2009, when I was just, I think, a first-year associate, just over a year after her accident. She never let her circumstances slow her down, though she was wheelchair-bound. A few years later, she led a major deal between pharmaceutical companies that earned her recognition from the American Lawyer magazine and Law 360. She went on to become a fierce advocate for the disabled community and directed much of her energy towards furthering progress in spinal cord injury research. When New York State cut crucial funding for spinal cord injury programs, including the ones that helped her recover, she co-founded New Yorkers to Cure Paralysis to restore the funding. Also, and fortunately for us gathered here, Nancy joined the board of NCLEJ. Nancy was both a stalwart financial supporter and a true contributor to the organization's work. Nancy's involvement on the NCLEJ board helped NCLEJ and her fellow board members to see issues of social and economic justice through a different lens. Specifically, she brought vividly to our attention the real practical issues faced by individuals navigating New York City in a wheelchair. Issues that were not only logistical, and of course, more obvious once she called them out to us, but of biases and ableism that rendered even high-powered lawyers like herself invisible or written off by many. She was willing to share her experiences, and of course her thoughts went not to herself, but immediately to those without the means to address these issues in the same ways that were available to her. This had a profound impact on Nancy's fellow NCLEJ board members and to the work of the NCLEJ. It rededicated us to pursuit of disability rights as a key and strong pillar of our economic justice work. NCLEJ has litigated major access cases, access to benefits, access to transportation. The importance of this work was constantly reinforced by Nancy. Nancy also was extremely effective as a fundraiser. She raised firm and individual gifts from lawyers in her network. She was always messaging how fortunate we are and translating that into the need to give and contribute. She would hope that by honoring her here today, you all are inspired to do so in the same way. We will always remember Nancy's story to be one of triumph in the face of adversity. Let us all honor her legacy by living our lives as Nancy lived hers, fearlessly, passionately, and with true determination. And let us continue her mission to advance disability rights as the next frontier of civil rights by supporting the National Center for Law and Economic Justice in their important continued litigation efforts. Thank you.
Next, it's my honor to introduce someone who leads an organization that is allied closely with the NCLEJ in the fight for racial and economic justice. Please welcome Typhus Smith Butler, who is the president of DEMOS.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Typhus Smith Butler, and I am the president of DEMOS, a think tank that centers racial justice in our solutions that build a just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy. And I am honored to join the National Center for Law and Economic Justice in celebrating the critical work of co-conspirators for justice. Long before I became the president of DEMOS, I witnessed the impact and influence of one of our next honorees, Heather McGhee. Her influence on the national discourse around racial justice, our economy, and our democracy has been phenomenal, and personally for me as a former state-level policy leader. And long before she became a best-selling author, Heather helped shape many major policy accomplishments during her 16-year tenure at DEMOS, first as a staff member and then later as president. Some of her accomplishments include pro-democracy reforms, such as public campaign financing, same-day registration, and automatic voter registration, won in dozens of states and Washington, D.C. And also landmark consumer protections that reined in credit card abuses and saved consumers more than $50 billion in fees. As a race-forward leader, Heather spearheaded a national conversation that challenged traditional notions of dealing with race and class. She also reflected inward, leading a racial equity organizational transformation within DEMOS, which increased the racial diversity of our staff and explicitly brought racial equity to how DEMOS approached its work. That work not only outlined advancing racial equity as one of its core overarching goals, but it made explicitly clear that a strategic racial analysis was required in order to, quote, meaningfully advance equality in our democracy and our economy. At DEMOS, we also understand that our work on racial transformation has only just begun. Through litigation, partnerships with grassroots organizations across the country, and policy and advocacy research, we are determined to create the conditions necessary for an inclusive democracy to take root and to thrive. Also, we have been listening and keeping our finger on the pulse of the movement, building in partnership with grassroots leaders around the country. And what movement leaders are telling us across the country is that in order to build this truly inclusive democracy, we must focus on shifting power to the people. The sum of us can never be made whole so long as we continue to devalue and deprioritize our most impacted communities. Now, 5 years after Heather transitioned from her role as DEMOS president, we are firmly rooted in our role as a movement-aligned think tank committed to racial justice. And when I began my tenure at DEMOS, on the DEMOS board in 2017, I went to Heather with an internal battle I was facing as a state policy leader in Georgia for nearly 2 decades. And I felt like at that time I wasn't making the impact in this frustrating policy arena. And I wondered if I should call it quits and transition to the more exciting work of organizing and movement building. And Heather encouraged me then and underscored how important policy work is. She said to me, I understand, but the truth of the matter is that there are many people doing movement work that look like you, but not very many people in policy leadership roles, and we need you in the policy space. It is largely due to Heather's words of wisdom and her encouragement that I'm here, that I didn't quit. I remain a problem solver through the lens of racial equity and public policy, and it is because of Heather's support that I can actually pick up the mantle of Demos and lead it into its next iteration, giving honor to her legacy and now working to build lasting, durable governing power for the people, the Demos. Thank you, Heather, for your leadership, your voice, and your wisdom for our nation, but more importantly, for me. It is with my deepest gratitude that I welcome the Social Justice Maker recipient for the National Center for Law and Economic Justice Changemaker Award, Heather McGhee.
Oh, thank you so much. With the picture? Okay. Oh, I was not expecting to be moved. Thank you, Taifa. I should have known. That was stupid. Thank you so much, Taifa, for being willing to come and give me that award on behalf of this beautiful organization. Congratulations to Dennis and the staff, to the amazing board, and to all of you on a beautiful night. And I think, as far as I was able to track with the text messages, a well-supported, funded night, because that's actually what we're here for, right? Is to make sure that the amazing lawyers and staff of this organization have exactly what they need to go and fight the good fight now more than ever, right? So I am just really pleased and honored to be given this award, and I just want to say that in some ways it feels very full circle for me to be here in New York, to be with and among lawyers who fight in so many different arenas for the common good. I was born on the south side of Chicago, and the experience of growing up there really in many ways defined who I am and how I see the world. I was born in 1980, go ahead, do the math, and that was really at a time of the sort of beginning of the crescendo of the inequality era, right? Where we really experienced massive dislocation and job loss of the manufacturing jobs and the public sector jobs. And you saw in a very vivid way on a block by block level what happens when the jobs go away, and how that really destroyed so much of what held us together as a community. But I was lucky because I grew up in a home that when I asked questions about what was going on, why my friend Ralph's belongings were out on the street, why the factory on Kedzie had to close and where those bosses thought those men mostly would work, my parents never said anything that blamed the victims of injustice and inequality. They always asked me to look upward at the more powerful, the people who actually had some choice in the matter. You know, I am thinking right now of my mother, the amazing Dr. Gail Christopher, whose really close friend Karen Watson is here tonight and invited me to come and be a part of this on behalf of Dennis. And I'm thinking about my mother's favorite person in the world, who is no longer me, but my son. My son is almost 5 years old, and his middle name is the Arabic word for king. And I named him Dr. King because of after Dr. King, because of one of the many pilgrimages I took to the King Center in Atlanta. And the most recent one I did was when I was pregnant with him. And I decided to dedicate myself during my pregnancy to reading all of his works that I could get my hands on. And if you haven't done that, I really want to recommend that you do that. He is our prophet. He is our patron saint of democracy. And he is so much smarter and wiser and more complicated than the sort of, calendar and mug version of his quotes. One of my favorite ones of his that really guided me as I was writing my book, The Sum of Us, was the idea that we are caught in an inescapable web of mutuality, and that the threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that our fates are linked because an injury to one is an injury to all. And it's really those ideas that really form the basis of my work that I've been doing for the past 5 years since leaving Demos, which is to really figure out how a multiracial America can thrive. How can we be a society that lives up to its ideals if we are trapped in this sort of zero-sum competition for belonging and status? And I believe that we need to squarely confront the idea of the racial zero-sum, this narrative, this old story that has always been marketed and sold by some of the worst segments of our society. It's been sold for their own profit, economically and politically, and too many Americans are willing to buy it. This idea, quite simply, that progress for people of color has to come at white folks' expense, right? And that $1 more in my pocket must mean $1 less in yours. It's really this zero-sum worldview that sociologists tell us is actually a predominant way of seeing the world, but it has cost us so much. And it is one of the reasons why there is less support than there should be for the kinds of robust public goods that the National Center for Law and Economic Justice was founded to make our common birthright in this country. Right? The NCLEJ really understands the ways in which economic inequality and racial inequality are inextricably linked. I always say that wealth is where history shows up in your wallet. And if you don't understand that history, today's inequalities don't make sense, right? It makes no sense that today the average black college graduate has less household wealth than the average white high school dropout. Let me say that again. If you are a white high school dropout, you are likely to have more wealth than a black college graduate. That makes no sense unless you understand that the black college graduate has done everything that she should do. She's gone to college, she's graduated, she's even got a great job and a higher income than a white high school dropout, but the one thing she can't do is go back in time and make sure that her grandparents were not redlined out of the ability to own a home. Go back in time and make sure that her great-great-great-grandparents were not property instead of being allowed to own property. Wealth is where history shows up in your wallet. And you can't understand why the racial disparities that exist today that swell the roles of public assistance with disproportionately, though not necessarily majority, people of color and indigenous people. You can't understand why that is without understanding history. When I learned that NCLEJ dedicates much of their time to fighting back against predatory debt collection practices, my little heart fluttered. Because this was really the issue that I cut my teeth on as a young policy wonk, a baby wonk, maybe. The way in which wealth and debt, the financial markets, have been used to extract wealth out of communities of color at enormous profits was really sort of the foundational understanding that I had growing up in the world of economic policy and being a financial regulatory wonk in the 2000s before subprime was a household word. But what I understood was that even though Black and brown borrowers were 3 times as likely as white borrowers to be marketed and given these high-interest subprime loans, even though those loans were disproportionately ending in early foreclosures and creating ownership wastelands out of communities that used to be thick, rich, Black and brown middle-class home-owning communities, because of course the majority of those loans were refinance loans, not original purchase loans. And that in 2007, the Wall Street Journal did a huge cover story showing that the majority of subprime loans had gone to people who actually could have qualified for prime loans. I understood all of that, but it wasn't until September 5th, 2008 that I began to understand how right Dr. King was, that our fates are linked, and that there is no zero sum. You cannot exploit one part of our human family and profit on the other side without limit. That there is no defying gravity. And that ultimately, an injury to one is an injury to all. We have still not recovered across this country. Our politics, our families' wealth has still not, our faith in democracy, our faith in our leaders has still not recovered from the financial crisis. And so I say that as just one object lesson in the way in which these racist discriminatory practices in one segment of our economy really illustrate how much racism has a cost for everyone. And as I think about the work that NCLEJ does to make sure that those who have the least are afforded the common dignity of being full human beings in the eyes of our government, I of course think about the central metaphor at the heart of The Sum of Us, which is the story of what happened to many of the country's lavishly funded grand resort-style public swimming pools. In the book, I tell the story of how this country used to love spending on public goods. The New Deal era was full of public goods that helped to create the greatest middle class the world had ever seen, but there was an asterisk on that social contract. Right? So much of the great social contract that helped to create the American dream was for whites only, either explicitly or just in implementation. And when those segregated public goods then began to be opened up through the tireless advocacy of people in the civil rights movement, Black families and their allies in organized labor and in the bars all over this country, we began to see desegregation orders for our public swimming pools, and in response, many towns and cities drained their public pools rather than integrate them. In 1971, there was a court case about this, Palmer v. Thompson. The court at that point was sort of out of the business of creating integration and decided that there was no constitutional violation when towns drained their pools rather than integrate them. You know, for me, I'm actually not a swimming expert or a recreation expert. The story of the drained public pools speaks to the fundamental question of whether or not we are going to have a system of public goods. The system of public goods that in the New Deal era created the springboard for the American century, and so much of the innovation that has powered our country, so much of the private wealth that has decorated our landscapes. And yet, the question is, are we going to make those public goods modern for today's families, the way people live? And are we going to make them truly universal without prejudice? Or is there still going to be this association, this negative association of the public with undeserving people of color that ultimately makes so many of us decide to cut off our noses to spite our faces, to drain the pool of public goods, ultimately taking away a public good from everyone? If NCLEJ is successful, as it is so often, there will be a friend in the courts for every person who has felt neglected, abused, disregarded, dehumanized by corporations and by our government. And I know that not everyone here in this room today goes to work every day for welfare rights. And yet we are here together because we believe that our fates are linked. We believe that a country where people don't have to choose between food for their families, the light bill, or the doctor's bill, where people don't have to sleep in their cars in between shifts, is a better society for all of us. That it is not a zero sum. The vision of using the law to make sure that we all have what we need, not just to survive, but to thrive, is a very old one. And in the 1960s, it was given a home in this organization. And I am so in awe of the decades of work and tireless advocacy that has been done in the name of this organization. And I, for one, feel more hopeful about the future, that NCLEJ is still here, still thriving now under Dennis's leadership, really ready and willing to take on the changing judicial landscape. But now at a time when more people recognize that inequality is a poison in our society and that it doesn't have to be a zero sum, when more people are willing to come together across lines of race to fight for a future that works, not just for some of us, but for all of us. Thank you. Thank you.
And that is why the NCLEJ honored Heather McGhee tonight. To be clear, the book is The Sum of Us. It's blurbed, it's a New York Times bestseller. It's blurbed by Oprah. But I think more kind of relevantly, our home newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, said that every so often a book comes along that has the potential to radically shift our cultural conversation. The Sum of Us is one of those books. And for those in this room who have read this, you'll understand what they mean. For those of you in this room who have not read it, you must. And to that end, although this looks like a product placement or a sales pitch, it's not. We've bought books for everyone here tonight, and Heather has very graciously agreed to sign many of them. I know that it takes a lot, but thank you so much for that. And they're waiting for you as you exit tonight. I can't recommend it enough, and thank you, Heather, so much. That was really wonderful. So just as a quick reminder, I'm really pleased to announce we've made tremendous progress tonight against the matching gift, but we haven't closed the gap. So phone lines are open and they will be the rest of the evening. The work that the NCLEJ does requires serious commitment and funding over the long term. So if everyone could chip in a few $100s, that'd be awesome. Again, text NCLEJ to 50155, and then you'll follow the link to donate. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker. There he is, Steve McConnell, who's a partner at Reed Smith.
It's an honor and delight for me to introduce Brennan Torregrossa, an esteemed colleague, a dear friend, and now, according to NCLEJ, a justice maker. And that's according to me, too. In the book, The Sum of Us, which I guess we're all getting tonight, written by our first honoree, and also in the terrific podcast that accompanies it, there are lots of examples furnished. The filled swimming pools is just one of them. Examples of how marginalizing or excluding ends up hurting us all. And by contrast, reaching across those chasms and making efforts to do things, to make things a little bit more right, that helps us all. And when the tool used to redress those wrongs is the law, I think the term justice maker makes a lot of sense. And from the outset of his career, Brennan showed the ambitions and the talents to be a justice maker. I remember when he joined the firm, he hit us like a whirlwind, taking on every sort of case he could take. He really resisted the over-specialization that seems to afflict our profession. He did everything. He did a lot of things. And part of that lot of things that he did was pro bono work. And I recently made contact with one of the lawyers who helped oversee the pro bono program and asked him to reflect on his recollection of Brennan. And what he said was, from the day he arrived as a summer associate, Brennan was eager to get hands-on experience. Moreover, Brennan was a hard-working and fearless advocate. Now, I know one of the cases that Brennan worked on was a prisoner civil rights case, a Section 1983 case. And if any of you have ever stood in front of a typically skeptical Eastern District of Pennsylvania federal jury, and the person sitting next to you is a prisoner, and they were thrown in prison because of a conviction of a felony, you're trying to win that case and have that jury give some money to that person, I think you have a sense of what it means to be a fearless advocate. Now, Brennan did very well at the firm, made partner, made lots of friends along the way, but then he went and did something even better, and that is that he joined GSK, a company that's committed to making lives better and longer, but also a company with a legal department that's committed to having a robust, fully engaged pro bono program. There are a lot of corporations out there that write checks, and I'm sure that's terrific, that's wonderful. But GSK also has a lot of sweat equity involved in going out and making things better in the community and being justice makers. And I'll give you one example of a case. It's one that got some publicity, and it involves a woman named Rosalia Santiago, a 69-year-old woman in Philadelphia. She co-signed a student loan for her granddaughter, and when her granddaughter couldn't pay off that loan, the bank came after Ms. Santiago and would have taken her house. And things got very close to default, and then Brennan and a team of lawyers swooped in. They did what good litigators do. They took a good hard look at the other side's case. They challenged it. They filed motions, and when all was said and done, the case was dismissed, and Ms. Santiago was able to keep her house. As I said, the case got some publicity, and there were some interesting quotes. Brennan was quoted as saying that in that case, he felt more pressure than he had for any other case because he knew exactly what the stakes were for his client. As for his client, what she said was, she thanked her lawyers, she thanked God, and then she said, now I can move forward. I want to thank Brennan. I want to thank all the people at GSK, all the justice makers out there, NCLEJ. Because of all of your efforts, we can now, as Ms. Santiago said, move forward together. And now let's hear from our honoree, Brennan Torregrossa.
It's always dangerous having a trial lawyer introduce you, but I thought that went well. Thank you, Steve, for those really kind words and outstanding memories, honestly. I want to thank the National Center for Law and Economic Justice for this inspiring award. And in accepting it, I want to say some thank yous, and I want to talk about glass eagles. Glass eagles. Let's start with the thank yous. So I want to thank my family to start. That includes my parents, who, if you don't know them, they've been doing pro bono since before I was put on this earth, taking cases all the way to the Supreme Court. They are an incredible inspiration to me. That includes, of course, my wife and my children, which includes Gabriella, who's a student at Pace University here in New York City. She's getting her degree in social media management, which means when she calls my social media posts cringeworthy, I am funding a graduate education forced opinion behind that. Gabby, seriously, thank you for being here, and you know that I always love you. I want to thank GSK and my colleagues who are here. I've worked for this company for 25 years, half on the outside, half on the inside, and there's a reason for that longevity. These people are incredibly inspiring. They wake up every day trying to help people live longer. And they don't just care about their healthcare mission, they're active in the community, including giving 10 GSK Impact Awards to centers like this one for their work. They've never told me no on any case that I ever took, no matter how busy I was. And I think it's about more than just giving money, and GSK certainly stands behind that. I want to also thank my colleagues who also inspire me to help others, and that includes Andy Boczkowski. Andy, could you just raise your hand, please? He's in attendance. Andy is my colleague at GSK. He runs our pro bono group. He set up our pro bono group. The reason GSK does so much pro bono work is because of Andy. And I've known Andy since law school. We clerked together. We were on the best softball clerk team ever, named the Harmless Errors. And Andy, I think when they did due diligence on this award, I think the foundation of a lot of your work actually showed up. So I share this award with you, and I thank you. So please, let me thank you. And that brings me back to the center. I want to thank you again, but not for the award, but for the work that you do. And that brings me to Glass Eagles. So my first pro bono client was a couple we'll call the Ortizes. When I was a young lawyer at Deckard, I thought the pro bono work I should do to inspire me should be adoption cases, because I thought that they would be uplifting. The circumstances under which these children needed adoption were heartbreaking. And the worst motion I've ever filed in my life, and I've filed a lot of them, is the motion to terminate parental rights. But people like the Ortiz always inspired me to continue to help to do more. The Ortizes heard a cry next door, and they found a young baby boy who had been abandoned by their mother. They raised him his whole life, and all they wanted was a lawyer who would help them make it official and adopt him. The first time I met them, they tried to pay me $400. It was very difficult to break the language barrier and explain to them the concept of pro bono and that my services were free. Every time I met them, they tried to pay me $400. After I finished the case and the adoption was successful, and of course refusing the money, they presented me with the most beautiful glass eagle I've ever seen. And that glass eagle has inspired me to this day to do justice by others. And that glass eagle represents the center in my view. You are all the glass eagles above the sky, searching for people who need help and bringing them justice. From everything from Alaska, helping people get food stamps, which are basic rights that seem under attack every day, to right here in Applebee's in New York, you have the waterfronts covered. I really respect what you do. You may give me awards saying that I'm a justice maker, but you are the justice makers. And that brings me back to the Ortizes. After they gave me the glass eagle, I later looked up how much it cost. I'm Italian, we always want to know what everything costs. Do you want to guess how much the glass eagle costs? $400. We all need to answer the cry next door. We can do that by supporting this great organization. Thank you.
Wow, well, thank you, Brennan. So I take this podium after an evening that could not have been more incredible. I mean, Heather, Brennan, Steve, Dennis, Taifa, Saima, the remarks tonight, it just thrills me to my core to see all of you tonight and to hear these great remarks from the podium, and I hope that you have all enjoyed the evening. I must say I'm even more thrilled about the future of NCLEJ. As many in this room know, I've been a believer in this organization since 1991 when I graduated law school and became a staff attorney at NCLEJ and did that work for my first 5 years of practice. And then I moved to private practice and never left this incredible family. Because it just has been that much a part of me. But this particular moment in time is really exhilarating because of the ways in which NCLEJ's work and our impact is growing. As you've heard tonight, our successes are legion. We have a tiny legal staff. It seemed large because of all the stories you've heard. It's actually a very small staff. and I'll use a word because I noticed that every single person who talked about NCLEJ called us mighty. We're small but mighty. But our success just isn't possible without people in this room and others like you. So I joined everybody else from the stage in thanking all of you, all of our supporters and funders, both individuals and foundations and firms. But I will say I know that we can do more. We can still do better. And I want to talk to you about a couple of the ways in which we can all do that. Right? Now, to some of you, that may mean joining NCLEJ on a pro bono case. So I can personally tell you how rewarding that is. In fact, I just finished a case with Sima, who actually, after 4 years of litigating this case, we finally met in person tonight. Even though the case is done, we've won, and attorney's fees are paid. We never met before tonight. But we just finished a case that we brought against Suffolk County, New York, under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act for failing to provide accommodations to Suffolk County residents with disabilities in a case called Newkirk. And through that case, we helped a client, we helped thousands of clients, but one of our clients, Christopher, had a story that was particularly compelling, just as an illustration of how disabilities can get in the way of access to benefits and justice. So Christopher had a cognitive learning disability that made the multiple stage process of applying for public benefits, then recertifying for public benefits, extremely challenging. And he had communicated, and his advocates had communicated with the county numerous times about the fact that he couldn't understand the application process. He couldn't understand, once he got food stamps, once he got Medicaid, what it required to certify, to the point that, he got notices that he couldn't understand, asked for help and didn't get it, and ended up losing his benefits. So because he couldn't understand the process, he wasn't able to purchase food. He was at risk of eviction and losing his home. And it required advocates to come in and remedy those harms simply because he had a disability that, without accommodation, deprived him of access to benefits. We brought suit against Suffolk County. We got a class certified, and then worked with some actually quite remarkable people within the county on a remediation plan and a consent order that really provides remarkable relief to people in Suffolk County. It was a case, many of you know I primarily do class action defense work. This was a class action where we proudly represented the plaintiffs, and incredibly rewarding. And so many of you in this room are lawyers at law firms who can jump into a case like this with NCLEJ and make a huge difference. The other thing, and I will say, will be one of your absolute best professional experiences because you will be working with incredible lawyers alongside you, and not just your colleagues in your law firm, but at NCLEJ. To others of you, you can help by introducing this organization to other people. Even something as simple as liking our social media, texting out pictures of your evening today and why you're here supporting NCLEJ and others joining you. We are a well-kept secret, and we're too well-kept of a secret, and we need to expand our reach. So if you know other people who would be interested in joining us and joining this fight, whether they're lawyers, whether they're in PR, whether they're, anybody from any profession, walk of life, no profession at all, we take all the help we can get. Think about who you can introduce this organization to help us expand our reach. And of course, for others of you, it means reaching into your pocket, as so many of you have done tonight. I was told on my way up here that we have so far raised $815,000. That exceeds our budget, so we are absolutely thrilled. But I will tell you, people, do not let me leave money on the table for this organization. Don't let me do that, okay? Don't let that happen, okay? I came here to offer a match, and I will match, okay? So please make sure that money gets to this organization and continues to do good work, okay? So anyway, no matter which way you contribute, beyond your participation here tonight, please join us in our efforts, because we are all better, safer, more full human beings, better Americans, when everyone has both the access and agency to thrive and find economic stability, success, and joy. Now, so before I leave the stage, I just want to tell you we have beautiful flowers on all of our tables. We do not want those to go to waste. Please take the flowers with you this evening. Also, stay. Our bar is going to be open. We're here to spend time with each other. As Doug mentioned, we have copies of Heather's book that she has very graciously offered to sign for all of us. So enjoy the time together, talk to our staff, talk to our board, and learn more about NCLEJ. And thank you all so very much.